Thank you for joining us today for our third installment of the 2026 Custom Training webinar series hosted by Extended Campus Custom Training at the University of Texas at Austin. We're grateful to have you with us as we continue exploring topics that help leaders and organizations navigate today's evolving workplace. As part of this series, we'll continue the conversation in our next webinar in August, the role of communications in organizational success. But today we're focusing on a challenge that every organization faces at some point, leading effectively through change. Today's session, Strategies for Times of Change, explores how leaders can help their teams navigate uncertainty with confidence and clarity. So we're excited to have our instructor, Chris Ahrens, talk to you about this topic. And Chris, I'll turn it over to you for now.
All right, well, great. Thrilled you're all here. Very important topic, something I'm very passionate about. So this is a little background on me and some of the people I've worked for and done trainings for. But I think we need to start with kind of a level set, which is where we're at right now. And change is exponential. I think you're all feeling that and know that. But the biggest thing is that how we're dealing with it and how our teams are dealing with it has greatly changed over the last few days, weeks, and months and years. And I don't know about all of you, but I find it that it seems like every morning I wake up and there's another 100 things that have changed. Some of them impact our organization, some impact us personally, our families, whatever. But this constant rate of change, not knowing what is going to change next, not knowing what the change is going to be when it does change, not knowing what the impact is going to be immediately, is really putting our teams and our leaders in a position that is very, very difficult for them to move forward. And they're using some strategies to cope with it, which frankly, some of which might be suboptimal. And one of the things that is happening now, and we'll talk a little about AI, but I'm not going to talk that much about it, is that AI is making things easier and harder simultaneously. But a lot of organizations are seeing this change and they're prioritizing speed and clarity to just move forward. And that ignores really what the climate is now, which is pervasive and ongoing and exponential change. And the best way to see this in an organization is to ask 10 people on your team to make a call on something that has an ambiguous or difficult to answer problem, and keep them in different rooms, keep them in different scenarios, and watch them all come up with either a core group of 5, 6 different things, or in some worst case scenario, 10 different calls on the same exact problem. And that's what change is looking like in a lot of organizations that we talk to and deal with. And it's not a talent problem, it's a decision problem. And that's because a lot of people are looking at the layout. And let's just agree what kind of decisions we have to make right now. The era of making good versus bad, or the choice between good changes or good options, is pretty much over. If you have an option to change something or to move forward and there's a good, better, best option, the answer is obvious. And what we're dealing with right now is we're having to decide between 2, 3, 4, 5 really crappy, really awful options to move forward, because the easy answer would be the answer we would choose. So that's where the decision has to come, is when there's something very, very difficult to choose and the options are not great options. They're what is the best option given a really, really lousy set of options in front of us. And so the plan breaks and then the disagreement does. And that's because the speed and wanting to have clarity really is causing teams to diverge. And that's the issue, is that they're looking at these things and saying, well, what could I do? What could I do to not get fired? What could I do to not get in trouble? What could I do so my boss won't be on my back? What could I do to defend myself, or just have a line that says, I did what I thought was right and here's why. And so that's really what change is. Change is this X-ray that is exposing the strategy, the organization, the culture, and how you build a team. And if the change sees that it's all baked and it's going to be mostly right, it will never be perfect, then generally you will get the kind of right kind of outcomes. And you can see organizations that are harnessing change pretty well. If you look at some of the teams at Apple, some of the teams at other bigger brands, even some smaller startups have actually monitored and found a way to handle change in a much better way. And then you see companies that just don't seem to have a handle on change. And that's because their strategy is not baked so that when people are in disparate, hybrid, remote teams, they don't know what to do, or they do the next best thing. And so one of the things that I'm a big proponent of is values inspire, but principles decide. And this is a huge thing because every one of your organizations, I know, has some beautiful values chart somewhere on a wall, somewhere on the website, somewhere in the C-suite's offices. And they're all largely generic, and they're all largely say the same. We're going to be great. We're going to be customer centric. We're going to do this kind of, flowery language. But they don't actually help these people in disparate locations with difficult problems decide anything. They're just platitudes on a wall, and they don't mean anything. What we really need are principles. And principles are those guiding things that tell people what to do, what matters, what right looks like in the face of all of these very difficult, very problematic changes and choices we have to make in decisions. And then it allows them to do what is generally best, even if the leader is not in the room, or they can't get hold of their team and get a consensus or something like that. So the really interesting thing is that this is not the hardest thing to do, but it is hard to push people down and get them to bake these principles in and understand what a good principle is and understand what's actually going on in the organization today. And so what I've done is I've broken this down into a 3-act kind of thing that you can use starting tomorrow. And the first thing is C. We have to look at what changes are making a difference, what is holding, what premises are not working, where we tend to make bad decisions, where we tend to make bad discussions, where we tend to have bad outcomes, and think about what those are. So it's a little bit of an introspective process to go through and say, let's look at our last 10 decisions. Let's see what worked and why it worked. Let's see what didn't work. Because the nice thing would be if I could give you all a list of 10, 15 principles that would work for any or most organizations. That would be an incredible world. But again, your organizations are different. The change is pervasive. It's happening so much. It's happening at an individual level, a societal level, an organizational level, a team level. So you've got to actually see what's working with these decisions. And it's a very, very worthwhile exercise to do. And what happens is a lot of times teams really look at what they did yesterday and they say, okay, that worked yesterday. So let's just make that the default rule for how we're going to handle this. The problem with that is that the past is a very poor predictor of the future. And so while you're looking at these decisions, it is incredibly important that the team, the leaders, the organization says, okay, why did it work? And was this a one-off case, or was the scenario and the specifics so unique that we really, this is only going to work in this instance? Or if we tweaked it a couple of ways, or if we looked at 8 other decisions that were kind of similar, this still would get us to the right area, the right answer, the right decision, not just bake everything in that it worked yesterday, it's going to work in the future, because that is what a lot of teams are doing. For that clarity point that I mentioned earlier, is they are just leaning on best practices. And the problem is that the execution wasn't the problem, it was the premise, because the best practices have been there so long that we actually get really good doing the wrong thing. I have seen this time and time again at great organizations where they actually are so baked into best practices because they know they can't get fired, they know they can defend them, and they wind up doing the same things over and over again, even though it doesn't get a good or even great result. In some cases, it gets a bad result, but it's justifiable and it is also defendable in a meeting or in an executive situation where you say, well, this is what we've always done and nobody told me to do anything different. So the first thing is we have to do that introspection. Then we have to go through and then we have to cut. Change demands principles, not preferences. So we've got to think about what we are going to cut, what we're going to get rid of, which best practices probably shouldn't be best practices anymore. Many times they shouldn't have been best practices in the first place. And the big thing we have to understand is if it costs nothing, then it decides nothing. If we have a best practice that costs us nothing, that it's so easy to do that there's not going to be any kind of consequence to it, then it's really not a best practice. It's just that flowery language pushed down to a team level. So a principle has to sound good, but it also has to make a trade-off. It has to show that we're willing to put skin in the game and actually do something that is going to require us to actually get a trade-off. Because if we don't have that trade-off, we have this interesting thing where people will just keep doing that same thing over and over again, but they're not actually making the hard call. They're not actually making the decision. And that's one of the things that AI really can't do for us very well, is make those hard calls, make those decisions, what involves people and a lot of different trade-offs and a lot of different things. So we've got to look at these in a much different way. And in order to do that, we really need a set of principles. Now, most organizations have between 5 and 15 principles. There's no magic number. But the magic about a principle is it has these three things. It has cost, conflict, and consistency. So what does it force us to give up? What is it going to do? And when we pressure test it, will we do A or B? It can't be we're going to do a little of A and a little of B. Or sometimes we'll do A, sometimes we'll do B. There has to be a conflict. There has to be a cost. And it has to be something that if we gave those 10 people in a room, most of them, because we always will have a random actor in any room or any group, will make the same call or a very, very similar call and get a very, very similar outcome. And that's what we're trying to do with a principle. And if you want to see what great principles are, Apple has 45. Right? So if you were to go to work at Apple today wearing a blue shirt and working at the Apple store, before you talk to any customer, before you do anything on the floor, before you do anything in your job, they would actually send you to Apple University. And for over a month, you would be trained in the principles that Apple uses. Now, these are freely available on the website if you just Google Apple's leadership principles, or I can make sure there's a link that you guys could find in the follow-up. You will see that they have these 45 principles, and they are extraordinary, many of which were stolen from other organizations like Amazon, Coca-Cola, places like that. And that shows you that some of these principles are durable and they are transferable. And when you look at these principles, and I would encourage you all to do it, is say, can we steal some of these? Could we take one of these and modify them and get these? And then we could pressure test them and see if they hold up, because good principles do generally have this. But again, they have to be specific to your organization. The other thing we want to do once we have our kind of principles down is we want to really think about holding. And this is Act 3, is sometimes in this rush to change everything, we really get into this thing where we're just going to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We're going to just change everything. None of this stuff works. We're not getting the right decisions. So let's just change it all. And if any of you have ever worked for a new leader who came in like a brand new broom and just started sweeping everything clean, you will see how awful that is. It negates all of the wonderful work that is there. It negates all of the good things that people do and the unwritten rules and laws that we live by that have actually held the company and the team and the culture together. So some of the things we do have to preserve, but we do have to do that introspection as well and say, okay, what are we going to hold? What is something that needs to be codified? What is something that we don't talk about and people learn on their own, or they learn through back channels or just through trial and error? How can we push that to the fore? Should that be a principle? Should that be part of our training? Should it be part of our hiring process? Those are really important things to understand as we're going through this. And this doesn't take a year-long, 4,000 person team. It really just takes a concerted effort of some really good leaders and teams to spend time on this and really go through this three process thing of a see, cut, hold. And then we have to look, is there new evidence or discomfort? And this is one of the hardest ones for a lot of teams, is that every exception reopens up. Well, is this different? Do we need a new principle? So we don't want to keep adding principles and we don't want to keep adding things. A lot of times it's just discomfort, and that's what we have to do. Now, there's a very famous quote that says, you can always tell a stupid man or woman by the fact that when new evidence comes in, they do not evaluate the choices they're making. You should do that. When new evidence and new change comes into the organization, comes into the team, we should reevaluate everything, but it shouldn't immediately be a black and white, we're not going to do anything with it, or we're going to create a new principle. There can be a bunch of different things we can do with it. And so this all has to tie to what is our principles, and it goes back to what is our organizational strategy. And one of the things that really just blows my mind is that there are so many organizations who do not have a codified strategy. They don't have a real strategy. They have a plan, and a strategy is not a plan. And that plan only works because it's a checklist, and you can go through the checklist and not come out the other end different, or change the trajectory of the organization, change how people lead, change how people decide, change how people function. And a strategy has to be understood at every level. If the janitor doesn't understand the strategy, then you don't have a strategy. Or if only the C-suite understands it and everybody else has a different take on it, then you don't have a strategy. And what you have is de facto strategy. De facto strategy boils down to the work and efforts and decisions people make on a day-to-day basis. So if you don't have a strategy, you can go back and look at those decisions like we looked in the C stage or act and say, okay, on a given day, this team generally does A, B, and C because they don't get in trouble for it. So that becomes their de facto strategy. That becomes how they lead, how they move forward, and how they kind of get through the day. And again, this is what a lot of really good organizations do. And then you see things where these organizations are not quite as effective because the strategy just isn't working, or you wind up having 10, 12, 20, 200, 2,000 different teams with all little micro strategies as they are applied across each group. And over time, those things fracture. And what you have is teams going off into the right, teams going to the left, teams holding stills, teams going up, teams going down. And so that's what we're looking for, is how can we have principles based on a cohesive strategy. And the two questions of strategy, according to Roger Martin, who is the guy I think has come up with the most beautiful definition of this, is where to play and how to win. And that works for just about every organization. If you can answer those questions and tie that to some core principles, now you have a framework that can handle change. And then we can use little levers and arm wrestle as change changes the organization, as external forces push us in different ways, as we get maybe some decisions that are harder to make or maybe don't fall into some of the things. Now we can deal with those things as outliers much more differently, and everything doesn't feel like an outlier. The other thing is that if we don't do this, we get what happened with this company called Klarna. Klarna, about a year ago, said, we're going to move fast and we're going to create clarity. And we want to do, it's an AI-based company, so we're going to use AI and get rid of a whole bunch of humans for all of our support. And on the surface, it seemed genius. They were going to save a whole bunch of money. They don't have to pay all these benefits. They could close some offices. Everything on the spreadsheet looked beautiful. And this is the problem, is that a lot of this stuff doesn't work in practice. It only looks beautiful on the spreadsheet. And, there are 100 other brands that have done this. Nike learned the same lesson. Southwest is learning the same lesson, is that it really requires a humanistic solution. Even if you love AI and use AI extensively, which I do, it still has to work in the real world, and it still has to work with real people. And it still has to work when there's an outlier, because that's what people want. And so this company got rid of all these agents, and now they've hired almost all of them back. And you can see and really appreciate the toll that took on the organization, because they all of a sudden said they were more profitable, but then customers start leaving, customers started complaining, people at the teams were not getting the kind of information, they were not getting the kind of insights that humans were bringing in. And it really took the company to new heights and then crashed them down to new lows. And so what we have to understand is that efficiency only scales when trust is earned, because that's the one thing that we're missing right now, is trust. There was just a new article the other day, and I'm sure, like me, all of you have probably checked out, Prime Days on Amazon, that people don't care about 5-star reviews anymore. And this is really important for all of us, not even if you don't have an e-commerce business, is that the world is more distrusting, and a 5-star review says the product is too good. that everything is too good. So we need some honesty. We need something that says, yes, that's exactly what's happening. And that can be applied not just at an e-commerce level, but at a team level, at a organizational level. If everybody on the team says everything is great, then it's probably not great. It's just sunshine being thrown around willy-nilly. So we really need to say, that's really what is important. We need people saying, this is good, we need to preserve it, let's hold that. But this isn't good. How are we going to deal with that? How are we going to understand that? Because we need to have that honesty and that trust to show that there is realness in there, because there's so much fake and there's so much AI in the world, and there's so much ignoring of the problems we see. So what you have is culture as a choice made under pressure. And a lot of people say, well, hey, we can just bake in culture and we have these kind of cultures. But it really is the kind of thing that when people come together, they have these principles, they have the strategy, culture becomes a self-defining factor of it. A great team is self-policing. When they know the strategy and they have the principles and they work, new people are trained right. When situations go wrong, they use that failure to actually create new successes and make new leaps into new areas, because the culture is baked there. And you can see that with some of the things that are going on with the World Cup. Teams that are overachieving are making better choices under pressure because the coach on the sidelines can't tell them what to do. But they can, when they're together, because they have the right strategy and because they have the right principles, figure out how to maneuver even when the coach isn't screaming at them, go right, go left, kick it here, do this. And so what we have to understand is that the clearest principles almost always win. Activity for activity's sake is absolutely not what we're looking for. And that's what a lot of great organizations are doing, is they're showing that they can do more with less. They're completing more things. And as Jim just said in the thing, this learning culture of understanding that if we are actually learning and failing, we're going to be ahead. And that way those principles are working, or we're modifying those principles to be specific to the situations that's going. So the question I have for all of you is, what must remain true when everything else is moving? Because everything's going to keep moving, but there are some things that we can make sure that are true always. There are some things that are under our control. There are some things that are in our domain that we do have license to, say is a bedrock and move around that. And so really important, when everything else is moving, the principle stays true, the principle stays correct. And then when we have that trust and strategy, everything works. So it's really about those three things, and understanding that values inspire, but principles decide. And if we have that kind of understanding and we kind of bake this in, we can actually get to a situation where the team functions better. And it starts, I was going to cover this earlier, but I forgot. I just want to mention this. It starts with hiring. One of the biggest things that I see right now, because I have anywhere between 200 to 400 students that are going into the workforce every semester, actually more than that, is that the hiring process in this country is incredibly broken. My son is looking for jobs right now, and he's going through 6, 8 rounds of interviews. One round of interviews, they tell him, will take over a month for him to go through, and then they will decide. If you can't decide on a human being to work in a team in less than a month and less than talking to 15 or 20 people, I don't know what you're doing. There's got to be a more effective way, because it turns off the candidate and it also delays you getting the workforce that you need. And then we have this culture in a lot of organizations where they seek clarity over the kind of person that is needed on the team. And so several organizations I work with will have structured hiring processes where you can only ask a limited number of questions, and those limited number of questions have to be the exact same or eerily similar to all of the candidates. And in one case, you cannot ask follow-up questions. So I don't even understand how that organization is going to get the kind of people who would live in a situation where you can do this 3-act process and handle change, because you're really not even understanding how they think, how they handle change, because you're not even have a dialogue with these people. So it starts with hiring, it starts with strategy, it starts with principles, and they all have to come together and work as a unit. but I want to leave enough time for questions because I hope there will be a lot of them. So thank you, and you can put them in chat and we'll go at them one at a time. Sound good? I am curious if you would agree that under the construct of C, that there should be some assessment of whether or not the rules of the game have changed since the last good decision was made. For instance, if the last good decision about a market idea was at a different point in the arc of the market, the underlying, oh, that's an interesting question. So, yeah, I think it's important, and it's a great question. I wish we could kind of have you talk and have a discussion, and maybe we can if they can allow it. But yeah, you should always look to see if there's a change in what's going on. So one of the things, and it sounds like you're in a kind of a more of a business than a non-business kind of a governmental organization, is a lot of times the arc that you're talking about could be based on a premise or a historical kind of scenario or objective, and challenging that or asking the question, is this the place we want to be? Is this still right? Is this still working? Is a really important one to go through. So I think that's a very important question to always ask that. And Jim put it in the chat beforehand, this learning organization. A lot of times when you get speed and you ask people to go faster and do more with less, they will short circuit things. They will do things in a much shrunk down process. And a lot of times that doesn't allow for, oh, it's Jim asked the question. I didn't see that. Sorry, Jim. They don't understand that there may have been a change, or they don't check with other teams who are already dealing with that change and things like that. So I think that's a very, very important part of the overall endeavor. And I think it's really important that to your point, Jim, about learning culture, is that we're asking the question, and then we're asking the question above the question, which is, okay, here's where we're going to go. Here's what it looks like. Is this still going to get us the outcome? Is everything we see still true? What is going on? What has changed? What does it actually matter that this changes, or does the principle hold the strategy hold? So I think that's a really good question. Many times in the Sea of Times, we saw becoming too lean. That's Libby. That's very interesting. Yeah. So it's we are seeing sea change and a sea of sameness at the same time, which is actually a phenomenal thing to me, which is that we see that this change is happening over and over again. But because people are so scared to take a bold step, they often do the simplest, most obvious next step. And so what happens is that you actually get a lot of people seeing the sea change, but then it becomes a sea of sameness, where almost every organization, every group, every team defaults to a lower level, kind of predictable, and AI is partially responsible for this in some cases, answer that actually doesn't get you the trajectory changing result, the trajectory changing decision, or the ability to run an experiment and say, oh, we're going to try something new and different, because if this works, we're really, really going to have something that's going to be great. And if it doesn't, we're going to learn something that would probably have cost us a lot of time, effort, and money. So I think it's very, very interesting that this sea change that a lot of organizations and teams are experiencing, and it's not just external. Sometimes it's, we're hiring new leaders. I have a group I'm working with. It seems like they're getting a new leader almost every month, and that new leader is changing the rules of the game. The outside the organization is changing too, but then inside, well, I think you should go right. Well, we've been going left. Well, that's not what we're going to do anymore. And then they just hunker down to that sea of sameness kind of, well, this is a defendable choice. This is an easy choice, or this is something that, it makes so much logical sense that I can't get in trouble for it. And that's not a good way to run the organization or run the team. There's a viewpoint that strategy is an antiquated concept altogether because of the pace and magnitude of change. The idea that it's better to remain agile. Ooh, look at you, Joe. Able to pivot quickly. So one of the things that I love the question, Joe, and such a smart guy. I think you still need strategy because you got to have something for people to anchor to and drive towards. So strategy is a bet on an uncertain future. And if we're going to agree that that's what it is, then we're betting on what we think the future is going to be. That's why you can't have a strategic plan, and there's no such thing as a strategic plan, because this plan is a checklist. So if that future that we're planning on is this, but things around us change, how could we be nimble and agile? So I don't think it's black or white or A or B. I love what a lot of teams at Coca-Cola do, which is they have what they call, I'm going to screw it up now. They plan on the change to be, they plan on every day to be 72 degrees and sunny. So if we're going to use the culture or the climate analogy. So Coke says the future world is going to look like this. And in 5, 10 years, whatever the time frame is for the team, we're going to say the world's going to look like this, and we're going to plan for that. But that's kind of a forecast, that far enough in advance that, we're planning on the world to be 72 degrees and sunny. Well, we know the weather is going to change. We know climate's going to change. We know we might have hurricanes, floods, tornadoes. It might just be rainy. It might just be cold. And they are constantly looking at that and saying, okay, here's where the strategy is going. But every team's responsibility is to see if there's a sea change, a weather change, whatever you want to call it. How could we run an experiment and see if there's something there that maybe we can not change the strategy entirely, but move it 5 degrees, move it 7 degrees, move it up or down a little bit. And I think that's a really great way to think about strategy. Is we're going to plan on this future world, but we're going to look at what's happening and be mindful that our version of the future could have moved, could have changed, because again, we are experiencing this incredibly exponential change. So I think that's a really great question. The agile thing and the pivoting means that your teams actually get more change and get no bedrock to ground onto. And I think that creates a lot of strife and a lot of problems for organizations and teams, because they don't know where they should be going when they're distributed, or when decisions have to be made quickly and not everybody's in the same room, or even if they are. So I think that's an excellent question. I hope that answers your thought, Joe. How do you advise leaders at companies who are going through layoffs as a big change at the org level? Yeah, Jennifer, that's a great question. So first of all, I mean, I've gone through layoffs and it just sucks. Let's just call that out right now. There's nothing about it. No matter where you are, obviously it sucks if you get laid off, but even the people that are left there, it's just awful. And so I think, again, that it absolutely has to be, here's why. Because, the biggest thing is that a lot of teams don't understand the why of the layoffs. It's like, well, did something change? Did something work? Did something happen? And they have to understand the why, and they have to understand the strategy still holds and their role in the strategy and the principle. So again, I think you need these kind of handholds for everybody, leaders all the way down to the janitor, saying this is what's going to work. And I think you have to go back to those things, because otherwise you're injecting really copious amounts of uncertainty, which we have trouble dealing with change because we don't know what it is. And nobody, if you ask 100 people, do you like change? I think 90 would say, oh, I hate change because it's uncertain. But it's not the change that they don't like. It is that the fact that a lot of the change happens without their control, or they don't understand why things are changing, or they don't understand where to go after things change. So I think if you don't have what we talked about in this webinar, you are actually doubling down and making and infusing more things that cause strife and issue with the team. So I think that's very important. In a new era of constant change, I wonder if you're seeing the anchors change. Ooh, interesting, Jim. The principles, as once terribly important, at the same time more fluid now than ever before in the face of changing principles. What do people hold on to as their home base in times of constant pervasive change? Should leaders intentionally curate esprit de corps belonging? Oh, look at you. Boy, Jim. Got a bunch of smart people on this call. That's great. So, from the work that I've done and the things that I've seen and the people I know at Apple, I am so phenomenally impressed with their principles and their leadership palette. It's called the Apple Leadership Palette. I think I may have called it something different earlier. And it generally does give you the kind of understanding, because I have students who work as blue shirts in the store, and I've asked them, I'm sure you get some crazy people coming in there with off the wall questions and issues and problems. How do you handle it? And they go back to those leadership palette, and they know kind of what to do. They know how to handle those things. They know what right looks like. And very importantly, the Apple leadership palette and a lot of great companies' leadership palette is all based on what's best for the organization and the end user, end customer. And I know some of you don't work in e-commerce, you're in governmental organizations, the end recipient. Um, it's a combination of those things. It can't be all one, it can't be all the other. And so I think that if you have them right, you've pressure tested them, and you've given enough clarity and training around them, and people understand how to use them, and they actually do use them because leadership rewards them. We didn't talk about this, we talked about hiring, but if leaders aren't metricing, bonusing, hiring, and firing on these principles and strategy, you will get random. And random is the most expensive thing in any organization because you can't bet on it. And going back to Joe's question, that's agile gone wrong, is that now we don't know what people are going to do. And so we will get random. And if you have 3 teams and 3 teams are doing random, that's awful. If you have 300 teams and they're all doing a version of random, that is catastrophic. And that's where leaders get fired. And when leaders get fired, then we introduce new change and becomes really a death spiral of change and of uncertainty. Yeah, Jennifer, I would, there's I should have given it to you, but I think you can find it. But if you look, there's on, I think it's the Internet Archive, somebody has posted them because for years they were secret. But if you've ever worked with Apple, they will share them with you if you have worked at Apple. But yeah, the leadership palette, and the Amazon ones are pretty good. The first 14 or 15, the last 2 they added are crap. And Coke has stolen from Amazon. Apple has stolen from Coke. So again, I think if you want to do this on your own, which any of you can do, it's not exactly, there you go. Thank you, Ashley. That was awesome. You can start with not just a blank sheet of paper and say, hey, what would a principle look like? And what would be a good principle? Say, here's some of the greatest organizations on the planet who have thrived through countless change and growth initiatives that would cripple almost any organization, and say, could this work for us? What would this look like in our organization? What are the specifics? Where does it work? Where does it doesn't work? Where does it break? What is the actual language? And then how do we train people to use it across everything? I think that's a really, really functional way to kind of inject this kind of thinking. And then again, I would look at your strategy as well, because this came up a couple of years ago. I was teaching an MBA class, and I had one of my clients say, hey, Chris, we have a new strategy, and I would like you to look at it. And I'm sorry, because I normally invite you to help us do this kind of work, but we had a leadership offsite, and it was just kind of to get us all together because we hired some new people, and then we decided to come up with a new strategy, and it really wasn't time to bring you in, so we just created it. And he passes it across the dinner table. And I look at it and said, this isn't a strategy. And he says, oh, sorry, I must have grabbed the wrong sheet out of my briefcase or my folder. Grabs another piece of paper, slides it across the table. And I said, no, these are objectives. And he goes, well, clearly I don't know what a strategy is. So why don't you tell me? And I said, well, it's where to play and how to win. And he goes, really? And he goes, yeah. He goes, I have 2 degrees and I've run multi-million-dollar, almost billion-dollar company. I've never heard that, and I've never really understood what it is. And I think if you start looking at what is the strategy for the organization, how do we win? And again, win is a subjective term. I get it. If you're not at an organization that's trying to sell more or something like that, if you're at the Bob Bullock Museum, what does winning look like? What does, any quasi-governmental Texas organization, what does winning look like? How do we succeed? How do we have our people pushing in the same direction and getting the kind of outcome? And then what does that look like? Where to play and how to win. It's a really fascinating question. And again, AI can help you with that. It won't give you a great strategy, but at least it'll give you a push in the right direction. But the Apple leadership palette is great. I've used it 1,000 times. It's so good. And now it's actually public because I couldn't share it with you for many, many reasons, one of which is an NDA. So trust in leaders is about congruence of words and actions, and intended trust in AI, that's right, was about auditability, I would guess. But I know you're typing fast. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, trust is trust. It's just a question of it. So first of all, I believe for AI, it's trust and verify. And
Mhm.
great organizations and great teams, I think, know what great is, and they use AI to help them. But I'm sure, as you know very well, AI is going to get you 70, 80% of the way there. But my thought on AI is that if you're not spending at least an hour for some consequential session and you don't get frustrated with it at some point, you're probably not using AI right. And so I don't have this trust in AI. I have this faith that it's going to give me some work, some output, but I got to verify it because so many times it is just wrong. I'm actually very saddened that the new Claude model is no longer available because that was looking very promising. But even then, it was making little nickel and dime things that if you didn't know what great looked like, if you didn't know what good looked like, you might accept it just on face value. But yeah, that was problematic. Back to your Coke example, Joe. Do you? They do a forecast, make predictions, and set a strategy. Sounds like they monitor and adjust as needed. In my experience, there's a human component that limits this process. Someone, sometimes a powerful executive. Oh yeah. Um, any advice for? Oh, okay, Joe, this is great. You guys being on this call is. I got. We should have this a roundtable with some of you just talk about this stuff because I'm sure you guys could add a lot of value to what I'm saying. Um, so it's Jim said it best. It's about this learning, growing culture. And so you don't get at Coke, with the teams I've worked with, you don't get people who are, this is where we're going and this is why we're going there. You get people saying, this sounds right. This feels good. It feels like this is the right direction. I see the data. I see the insights. I see kind of what's happening. I hear from the teams in the field. So we feel good. So remember, strategy is a bet on the future. And there's not going to be anything as a 100% bet ever. I'm from Nevada. I know that. And the worst bet in the world is 50-50 because you can't actually put money on it because it's a random choice. So you're looking for, and this is what Coke executives and other great executives do, is that they say, I feel like this is 80%. And a great book I would recommend to everybody is Annie Duke, Thinking in Bets. I feel like this is 80, 85% where the world is going to go, which of course leaves out 15% for, outcomes and things that are happening. So it's not that the prediction was wrong, it's that the prediction isn't coming right as much or as fast or in the way we thought it was going to happen. Unless the prediction was wildly off and you didn't use all the resources, signals, data, insights that an organization like Coca-Cola has, which at times has happened, by the way. Some of their AI things early on have not been good. Their last AI thing was not good last holiday season. They will make some bad bets or make some bad choices based on speed and other things. So it's never that the prediction was wrong, Joe. I think it's that we just see that the prediction was not quite as right, or that what we thought was going to line up to be this 1 through 10 kind of thing is missing 5 and 8, and that changes where we're going to land when we get through everything. And so it's not about getting egg on their face. It's about not locking themselves in, because you can't lock yourselves in on a bet, especially if you get new cards. And I think that's kind of the ways they look at it, and that's why great leaders look at it. Is yeah, I'm placing a bet when I have 5 cards in my hand, but when I get rid of 2 of them, do I want to up the bet, or do I want to change the bet, or do I want to move in a different direction because of this bet? So I think it's more about that flexibility. And you used agile, but I think it's somewhere in between there. So that's an excellent, excellent thought. Thank you, Joe. Fail fast, Jim, one of my favorites. Yeah, so I am a huge proponent of fail fast, and I am a huge proponent of failure in general because you learn nothing from success. And so, one of the things that I talk about in a lot of my trainings is fail fast and what I call the 10-50-90 rule, which is one of the things that I instill even with my students and all my teams, is that if I give you a complicated project or even a moderately complicated project, I want the team or the individual to come back at 10%, because even if I thought that I gave you perfect instructions, I probably didn't, and you didn't hear them perfect, or you misinterpreted them, or they weren't perfect to begin with. So that 10% check-in allows the team to bring their information, bring their thinking in a way that we can actually regenerate or recapitulate the course and the approach, which means that I can give them the information I probably should have given them, or the information I didn't know they needed, or information I have. Then we do it at 50%, then we do it at 90. And that way, when I get something back at 100%, I know it's going to be great because we have those three check-ins. And that's really what failing fast is all about, is having those incremental small check-ins with a moderate level of information and a moderate level of work and understanding. So if there is a point of failure, there's 90% left to course correct and get an incredible outcome, and something that you can bank on if you have to turn it into your boss at 5 o'clock on Friday, because you've seen it 90%, which could have been, 1 o'clock on Friday, and it's going to be great because it already was pretty great at 90%. So now we're just cleaning it up, and now we're just tidying it up and making it pretty. So that's a great way to think about failing fast and instilling teams to kind of remove some of the friction and doubt, because the worst things are when people go into a black box or a conference room or a Zoom room, and then you don't hear anything for 2 days, and then bang, out comes something, and you're like, what is this garbage? What is this crap? If you would have asked me, I would have told you that this is not right, or this is not what we need, or somebody else has this data and you didn't use it. So it's a really great way to think about failing fast and building teams that are built for change and constant change. Yeah, it's great. And if you want to think about it, somewhere there's a graphic where it shows a painting of the Christelle, it shows a painting of the Mona Lisa. So 10% is like a very rough pencil outline. 50% is where it's filled in a little bit so you can kind of see what it is. And 90% is where it's mostly the painting, but it is just basically missing the final touches and maybe some of the little details that will make the painting a masterpiece. That's another great way to think about it. Give me a pencil sketch, give me something that's more or less done, but not all the way done. Give me something that's pretty much done with just the finishing touches needed to be done. So another great way to think about 10-50-90. Yeah, Margaret. It's great. And I know you guys are dealing with a lot of things, so that's awesome. But it's just a repeatable framework for change. And that's one of the things with all the change. I mean, I've given you a lot, hopefully, I think, in this webinar, but there's little things like that when you're managing and thinking about the team and the outcome, the strategy, the principles. There's a lot of things like 10-50-90 that become leadership principles. And there's actually, I'm working on something now called the Leadership OS, which actually kind of bakes some of these things a layer below and says, here's what great leadership looks like. And 10-50-90 is one of those things, because it's hard for leaders. I know it's hard for teams. I know it's hard for the people around you, but it is really hard for leaders when they are being asked to do extraordinary things in this ever-changing world, and so many things are changing above and below them. So I think it's very important. Thanks to all of you. If anybody has any last-minute questions or wants to, talk about anything more, as always, Extended Campus has a lot of information. These webinars are great. I've attended a couple of them. They're really terrific. But it's important for all of us to just work to be better and figure out how to get principles and strategies and ways of handling change and making sure that our organizations and our teams are moving forward in spite of it all. So that's what I'm committed to. That's what's really important. And that's what my new book's about. So yeah, very excited, very thrilled you were all here. And like I said, I'll stick around for a little bit. But if you have any other questions, you can reach out to the Extended Campus. Follow me on LinkedIn, Chris Ahrens. But thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your very busy, very change-filled days to be here. If a great leader gave autonomy to his direct reports and his direct reports hired a very toxic manager, the team members left 3 rounds under this toxic manager. What should this great leader do? Well, fire the toxic manager. I mean, toxicity is one of the worst things, and a toxic manager left unchecked will absolutely poison the organization around them. So, we all make mistakes. You cannot be perfect. And part of the interview process, as imperfect as we've already discussed it being, does sometimes allow people to come through. Here's one of the things that I will answer that question with. And I tell my students, and I tell my organizations all the time. Right now, we have a world where AI writes job descriptions, employees or prospective employees write resumes with AI and cover letters with AI. Then we scan those, excuse me, with an AI tool to see who is most likely to get the job. Then we interview them and ask them to be human. And somewhere in there is lunacy, right? So I think that we're going to have issues with bad employees, bad actors, or suboptimal employees, because not all employees are bad. I think that's a bad way to say it. Suboptimal hires for suboptimal roles. All right. Wrongful kind of equations, that don't balance between the organization, the hire, and the team. And unfortunately, that bad hiring process at a lot of your organizations, it is much easier for somebody to die in that job than it is to fire them. And a toxic manager will poison the organization for decades. It will poison candidates, it'll poison the team, it poisons results. So, yeah, the best thing to do is cut bait. I've worked for some of the most toxic people on the planet, and I'm happy to go toe to toe with anybody who thinks that they have somebody more toxic, because I think I have a pretty good game, or pretty good understanding what toxicity looks like from a leader. And yeah, cut bait. There's a middle manager. The great leaders say the toxic. If C were fired, that indicates no. I think it's all about honesty and trust. If this is toxic, and with your question, I'm just going to go on the face value that this person, the toxic manager C, is in fact toxic, and toxic has what I would determine to be, and most people would determine to be toxic. It's not about protecting B, it's about protecting the organization and moving forward. A great organization. So here's the answer to your question. Great leaders take people with them, and great leaders take organizations to great places. And anytime you have a bad leader somewhere in there, great people leave and the organization suffers. So I don't know what you're trying to get out of it, if there's trying to like a third option, but I don't want to work any place that's toxic. People don't want to work any place that's toxic, and toxic leaders don't get great results for long. All right, we're at time. I thank you all very much. Again, I'll just stick around for another minute or two in case anybody else has any final questions. But again, you got the links, you got you can find me on LinkedIn, but I hope this was enjoyable, and really great spending some time with you, and really wish all of you the best in this chaotic world we're living in. Thank you all.